She's been through so much, my aunt said, standing in the middle of my living room like she owned it. She did not look at me when she said it. She was arranging throw pillows on my couch. I had been on the road for 11 hours. I drove straight from my work conference in Charlotte, skipping the hotel checkout breakfast, skipping the rest stop I usually take outside of Knoxville because I wanted to sleep in my own bed. I wanted my shower, my kitchen, my silence. What I found instead was my aunt's minivan in my driveway, my spare key missing from the lockbox, and a post-it note on my own front door that said, "Use the back front door sticks now." My front door did not stick before I left 5 days ago. I walked in through the back. My aunt was in my living room. My cousin Becca was in my bathroom. I know because I could hear her singing through the walls. Her husband Owen was in my kitchen, eating cereal from my cabinet, wearing a shirt I recognize from my brother's closet. My brother lives 400 miles away. I still do not know how Owen got that shirt. "What is going on?" I said. It was not a question. My voice came out flat and low, the way it does when I am somewhere past shock and not yet at anger. My aunt turned around and smiled at me like I had just walked into a surprise party thrown in my honor. "Oh good, you're home early," she said. "We were going to have everything settled before you got back." Settled? I looked around my own living room. There was a portable crib in the corner. There were grocery bags on my dining table, not put away yet, just sitting there. There was a scented candle burning on my mantel, a scent I did not buy, something floral and synthetic that was already giving me a headache. I looked at my aunt. Her name is Carol. She is my mother's older sister, and she has a way of presenting chaos as generosity. Every disaster she has ever caused has come wrapped in the language of family obligation. "Becca and Owen lost their apartment," she said, still smiling. "Landlord sold the building. They had nowhere to go. You have this whole house to yourself, and the baby needs stability. You weren't even here." I have a 2-bedroom house. I bought it 14 months ago. I work full-time as a project coordinator for a logistics company, and I travel occasionally for work. I am 29 years old, and I have spent 3 years saving for a down payment, eating sad desk lunches, skipping vacations, driving a car with a broken AC through 2 Georgia summers, and I earned this house the way you earn something when nobody hands you anything. "I was not here for 5 days," I said. "I was working." Carol waved her hand. "Same difference. The point is you have space and they needed it." Becca appeared in the hallway. She was wearing my robe. It is a white, waffle-knit robe I bought myself last Christmas, the nicest thing I own that is purely frivolous, and she was wearing it with the belt untied and a coffee mug in her hand, and she looked at me like I was the one who had walked into the wrong house. "Hey," she said, "we were wondering when you'd be back." I want to be clear about what I felt in that moment because I have thought about it many times since. It was not just anger. It was something older and more complicated. Becca and I grew up together. We spent summers at my grandmother's house. We were flower girls at the same wedding. We once drove to Florida together on a road trip that took 3 days because we kept stopping at every roadside attraction we passed. I loved her. Part of me still does. But standing in my hallway watching her drink coffee in my robe like she was on vacation, I felt something go very quiet inside me. "This is my house," I said. "You need to tell me what is actually happening right now." Carol launched into it. "The building sold in February. The new owner didn't renew leases. They had 60 days to find something. But Owen had a gap in his freelance income, and their credit took a hit. They stayed with a friend for a while, but that fell through. They've been in their car for 2 nights. The baby cannot sleep in a car. She has an ear infection. They just needed somewhere safe to land." She paused for effect. "You're the only one with enough space," she said. "Your mother agreed it was the right thing to do." My mother agreed. I pulled out my phone immediately. I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. "They just need a few weeks," she said before I could get a full sentence out. "You have that extra room sitting empty." It didn't seem right to say no when they have a baby. "Mom," I said, "nobody asked me." "Well," she said, and then she paused in a way that told me she knew exactly what she had done. "Carol said you'd make it difficult." I figured it was better to just get them moved in so it would be a done thing. A done thing? That is the exact phrase she used. Not, "I'm sorry," or "I should have called you," or even a brief acknowledgement that what they had done was, in any legal sense of the word, breaking and entering. She said, "a done thing," in the tone of someone who has already closed the case file. I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a moment, looking at the grocery bags on my table, at the cereal bowl Owen had left in my sink, at the scented candle still burning in the other room. Then I picked up my car keys and I walked back out to the driveway. Carol called after me. She said I was being dramatic. She said the baby had just fallen asleep and I needed to lower my voice. She said that family shows up for each other. I got in my car and I drove around the corner. I parked on a side street and I sat there with both hands on the wheel, staring at a stop sign, doing the thing I always do when I need to think, which is absolutely nothing for about 4 minutes. I just let it sit. Here is what I understood by the end of those 4 minutes. They were counting on me being unable to remove a baby from a house. They were counting on the image of it, the optics, the cruelty of making a young mother pack up a sick infant because her cousin wanted the extra bedroom back. They were counting on my decency to become their free housing. Carol had called my mother had signed off, and together they had manufactured a situation where saying no made me the villain. What they did not know, and what I had never told any of them, was that I spent 8 months before buying this house taking a real estate investor course that my company offered as a professional development benefit. I never planned to flip houses. I took it because it was free and because I wanted to understand what I was buying. But one of the modules was entirely about landlord-tenant law in various states. I sat through 4 hours of it on a Tuesday night with a glass of wine and a notebook. I knew things about Georgia tenant law that Becca and Owen almost certainly did not. I also knew that the longer they stayed, the more complicated this would get. A tenant who pays no rent and has no written agreement is still a tenant after 30 days in this state. I had been gone 5 days. I had 25 days before this became significantly harder to undo. I drove back. Carol opened the door before I even knocked, which told me she had been watching for the car. She had the expression of someone preparing to be magnanimous, ready to accept my apology and redirect us all toward the future. I didn't apologize. I said I had thought about it and I wanted to handle it the right way. Carol's shoulders dropped half an inch. Relief, I watched it happen. "Come in," she said. "Becca made pasta." I came in. I sat at my kitchen table, which now had a high chair at one end, and I ate pasta, and I listened to Owen talk about a landscaping contract he was about to land that would change everything financially. And I watched Becca nurse the baby and look comfortable and settled in a way that turned my stomach a little. And while I sat there, I built the plan. After dinner, I said I wanted to make things official so that my homeowner's insurance would be covered. I said I couldn't have people staying without documentation in case anything happened. I said it was for their protection, too. Owen looked up from his phone. "What kind of documentation?" "A property caretaker agreement," I said. "It's standard. Basically, it says you're here in a caretaking capacity rather than as tenants, which actually protects you from certain liability issues. And the big thing is, I can add you to my property management umbrella policy, which means you'd have renter's coverage included, for free." Becca's eyes went to Owen. Owen's eyebrows went up a little. "Renter's coverage," Becca repeated. "Full personal property protection," I said. "If anything happened to your stuff while you're here, clothes, furniture, whatever, you'd be covered. And I can add the baby as a dependent on the policy rider." I was lying about the policy. There is no policy rider. I was telling them what they wanted to hear, which was a version of the same thing they had done to me approximately 2 hours earlier. Carol leaned forward. "See," she said to Becca, "your cousin takes care of her people." I pulled out my laptop. I'd already drafted the agreement in the car. I had done it in 15 minutes using a template I found and modified. The document looked professional. It had headings and defined terms and a signature block at the bottom. The language that mattered was buried in the middle, in a section titled Property Use and Occupancy Status. Section 4.2, occupants acknowledge that their right to use and occupy the premises is derived solely from their employment and caretaking responsibilities as defined in Section 2, and does not constitute a tenancy, lease, or rental agreement of any kind. Section 7.1. Occupancy rights are revocable at the sole discretion of the property owner upon written notice of termination of caretaking duties. Revocation of caretaking duties simultaneously and immediately revokes all occupancy rights. No notice period is required. Section 9.3. Occupants consent to video and audio monitoring in all common areas of the property for security and property management purposes. This monitoring may be reviewed by the property owner at any time and may be used in any legal proceeding. I also included a clause that required them to maintain the property to a specific standard, itemized in an attached exhibit, and another clause that said any damage to the property would be deducted from a refundable security deposit, which I would collect in the amount of $500. The security deposit clause was the thing that almost stopped them. Owen frowned at it. $500, he said. We don't really have that right now with the move and everything. I said I would waive it for the first 30 days as a gesture of good faith since they were family, but that it would need to be paid before day 31 or the agreement would lapse automatically. He nodded. That seemed fair to him. I printed the agreement on my wireless printer and set it on the table. Becca read about a third of it. Owen flipped to the last page and looked at the signature line. Carol read none of it, because Carol does not read things. Carol trusts that everyone she loves is operating in good faith. Becca asked if they had to log their caretaking hours. She said it seemed like a lot. I told her it was mostly just for insurance audit purposes and that she could enter anything reasonable, even just things like checking the HVAC filter and watering the plants on the back porch. Fine, she said, and signed. Owen signed. Carol witnessed. I signed last. I collected the pages, slid them into the folder I had brought from my car, and said I had to go deal with a few work things and would be back in the morning. I told them there was food in the fridge, which there was, because I had not yet unpacked my cooler bag from the conference. I said to make themselves comfortable. Carol said she was proud of me for handling it maturely. I said thank you and let myself out. I drove to a Marriott 8 minutes away and checked in for 3 nights using my work travel rewards points. I got a room on the 6th floor with a view of the parking lot and a small desk by the window, and I set up my laptop and I opened the security app. I had installed a 4-camera system 11 months ago, within the first few weeks of moving in. 2 cameras inside. 1 in the kitchen and 1 in the living room. 2 outside. I had never told Carol, my mother, or Becca that the cameras existed. I had mentioned them to exactly one person, my neighbor across the street, because she agreed to let me connect one of the outdoor cameras to her Wi-Fi as a backup in case mine went down. Section 9.3 of the agreement they had signed made everything I was about to watch fully legal. The kitchen camera loaded in high definition. Becca was on the phone. Owen was on the couch with the baby. Carol was nowhere visible, which meant she had gone to the guest room, which meant she was planning to stay the night, possibly longer. I turned up the volume. Becca was laughing. She was saying, yeah, she thinks we signed some lease thing, doesn't matter. You can't kick out a baby. She literally can't do anything. We've got at least 6 months, maybe more if we... She walked out of camera range. I leaned back in the hotel chair. I am not a vindictive person by nature. I want to say that clearly. I do not enjoy conflict. I do not like the feeling of being in a standoff with someone I used to love. But I had driven 11 hours to get home. I had been excluded from a decision made about my own property. I had watched my mother override me like I was a child asking for something unreasonable instead of a homeowner asking not to be trespassed against. And now I was listening to my cousin on a hotel security feed, laughing about the fact that she had a baby to use as a shield. That is the moment something in me settled, not hardened exactly, settled, the way a decision feels when you finally made it all the way. I opened my laptop and I started working. First, I sent a formal email from my personal account to both Becca and Owen's email addresses. Time-stamped, with the subject line, Notice of Caretaking Agreement Terms. Property Standards Reminder. I included the specific clauses from their signed agreement and a polite reminder that per Section 3.4, no smoking of any kind was permitted inside the property. They were not currently smoking. That did not matter. I needed a paper trail of communications that established I was operating in good faith as a property manager, not as an aggrieved cousin. Second, I ran the background check I was legally authorized to conduct under Section 8.1 of the agreement. I had added that clause specifically because I knew I would need it, and I had worded it to comply with the Fair Credit Reporting Act. The results came back the next morning. I had expected it to be bad. I had not expected it to be this specific kind of bad. Becca had 2 prior evictions, one in 2022 from an apartment in Marietta, one in 2023 from a rental house in Smyrna. The 2023 eviction had a companion civil judgment attached to it. A landlord named Wynn filed suit for $14,200 in unpaid rent and damages. The judgment was still active. There was a collections firm involved. The firm's name was Hollister & Baines. I Googled Hollister & Baines. They were real. They were local. They had a contact form on their website. I thought about the mail I had not checked while I was away. I went to my mail app and looked at the scanned envelopes my mail forwarding service had captured. There were 3 letters from Hollister & Baines, all addressed to Rebecca Stanton Ward at my address. My address. Becca had used my address as her current residence in the civil case. She was being pursued by a collections attorney, and she had directed that attorney to my house. She was not just squatting in my guest room. She was hiding in it. I stared at the ceiling of my hotel room for a while. Then I opened the camera feed. On screen, Becca was making coffee. She looked completely at ease. She looked like someone who had made a plan and watched it work. I sat up and I started writing a very different kind of email. That afternoon, I sent a termination of caretaking duties notice to Becca and Owen's email addresses, simultaneously faxing a copy to the address on file because I had found during my real estate course that fax timestamps are admissible in a way that sometimes matters. The notice cited Section 7.1 of their signed agreement. It informed them that their occupancy rights had been revoked effective immediately. It said they had 4 hours to vacate the premises and that any personal property remaining after that time would be cataloged and stored off-site at their expense per Section 11.2. Then I called a locksmith and scheduled the rekey for 6 hours from that moment, giving them a 2-hour buffer. Then I called Hollister & Baines. I told them I was the homeowner and that the individual named in their active civil case was currently physically present at my address. I told them I had documentation establishing exactly when she had arrived at the property and that I could confirm her presence for approximately the next 4 hours. There was a pause on the line. Then the paralegal said, "Hold on one moment," and put me on hold for about 90 seconds, and came back and said someone would be in contact shortly. 45 minutes later, I was watching the camera feed when a car pulled up in front of my house. A man got out with an envelope. The doorbell rang. On the feed, I watched Becca answer it. I watched her face when she understood what she was holding. It is a particular kind of recognition, the moment a person realizes the thing they were outrunning has caught up. She stood very still for about 3 seconds. Then she turned around and walked back into the house without closing the door. I watched Owen's face when she showed him. I watched Carol's face when they told her. Within the hour, they were loading things into the minivan. It was not organized. Things went in without boxes, without care, the way you pack when you are packing to leave rather than to arrive. Carol was on her phone the whole time. I assumed she was calling my mother. I turned down the volume. By the time the locksmith arrived, the house was empty. He rekeyed all 3 exterior doors and the back gate padlock. I tipped him $20 in cash because none of what had happened was his fault, and he was very professional about the whole thing. I drove home. I stood in the doorway of the guest room for a moment. They'd made the bed, which surprised me. The room smelled like the detergent Becca has used since we were teenagers. Something with lavender in it. And for a second I just stood there. Then I opened all the windows and I let the house air out. My mother called me 6 times between that evening and the following morning. I let them all go to voicemail. In the messages, she cycled through the stages in this order: confusion, then hurt, then anger, then a brief attempt at reasonableness, then anger again, and finally a message that was just silence for about 8 seconds before she hung up. I called her back on the second day. I was calm. I told her exactly what had happened, in order, including the background check and the civil judgment and the fact that Becca had been using my address without my knowledge to evade a collections attorney. I told her that what had been done to my property was illegal, regardless of intent. I told her I loved her and that I was not interested in fighting, but that I needed her to understand that being family did not mean being a resource. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't know about the judgment." "I know," I said. She said, "Carol told me it was just a rough patch." I said, "Carol tells everyone what they need to hear to get what she wants. You know that." Another silence. I have replayed that conversation a lot since then. My mother is not a bad person. She is a person who finds it very hard to say no to someone who is standing in front of her crying. And Carol is very good at crying. That does not make it okay. But it makes it something I can understand, if not forgive immediately. Becca texted me 3 weeks later. The message was long. It went through several phases, an explanation of the financial situation that was framed as context rather than apology, a statement that she had not realized how serious the legal situation was, a suggestion that I had overreacted, and finally something that was approximately in the vicinity of an apology if you read it generously and squinted. I did not respond, not because I was punishing her. I did not respond because I did not know what I wanted to say yet, and I have learned that it is better to say nothing than to say something that you will have to walk back later. The civil judgment against her is still active as far as I know. Owen did land the landscaping contract, which I know because my aunt mentioned it to my mother, who mentioned it to me. I'm glad for him. That part is real and it has nothing to do with me. My house is quiet now. The guest room has my old desk in it again, the one I moved out to make room for the portable crib, and in the evenings I sometimes sit in there and work with the window open. The scented candle they brought is gone. I threw it away. I went back to my own candles. The ones that smell like cedar and clean laundry, the ones I chose myself. Carol has not spoken to me directly since that day. I understand she is angry. I think she expected that because she was older, because she had framed it as family helping family, because there was a baby involved. I would absorb it. I would file it under the cost of being the stable one, the one with the good job and the house, the one who does not need anything because she appears not to need anything. What Carol misunderstood, and what I think a lot of people misunderstand about people like me, is that appearing not to need anything is not the same as having nothing worth protecting. I worked for this house. I chose every piece of furniture in it, paid for every appliance, repainted the bathroom myself with a roller brush and 2 coats of a green that took me 3 sample jars to get right. This is not just square footage. This is a place I made on purpose, out of years of small choices and long hours and a very deliberate decision to build something that was mine. Nobody gets to walk into that and call it extra space. The most important thing I've learned through all of this isn't about tenant law, or how to draft a caretaker agreement, or what constitutes a revocable license versus a tenancy. Those things matter, and knowing them helped me. But the thing I keep coming back to is simpler than that. The people who treat your stability as something they're entitled to will never see it as something you earned. To them, Your having enough will always mean they should have some. The only way to change that equation is to stop letting guilt be the currency they pay with. I'm not bitter. I'm just clearer than I was before. I made coffee this morning in my own kitchen, in the quiet, with nobody else's dishes in my sink. Outside the window, the neighbor's dog was losing its mind over a squirrel. Somewhere on the street, a lawnmower started up. It was an ordinary morning. I had missed it more than I knew how to say. I keep thinking about the moment Becca signed that agreement. She clicked the pen, wrote her name, and smiled a little, the smile of someone who thinks they've just gotten away with something. She had no idea she was signing the document that would end it all. That's how it usually works, in my experience. The people who cut corners, who manipulate and maneuver and use guilt as a crowbar, they almost always believe they're smarter than the situation. Carol believed that family loyalty would override my legal rights. Becca believed that having a baby in the house made her untouchable. Owen believed the whole thing would just sort itself out in their favor. None of them stopped to consider that the person they were doing it to might actually think it through. I'm not saying I'm exceptional. I'm saying I did the work. I took a course nobody asked me to take, sat through hours of material that seemed abstract at the time, and kept notes I never expected to use. That preparation didn't come from knowing this specific situation was coming. It came from a belief that understanding the world you live in, really understanding it, not just assuming things will be fine, is worth the effort. When the moment came, I had the tools. That's not luck. That's what happens when you stay curious and take your own education seriously even when no one is watching. What Carol did was wrong. Not complicated wrong, not debatable wrong. She used a key I gave her for emergencies to let someone else into my home without my knowledge or consent. She coordinated with my mother to make it a done thing before I could object. She dressed it up in the language of family and sacrifice and need, but underneath all of that it was just taking. It was deciding that my boundaries didn't matter as much as her comfort with the situation. And when I pushed back, she called it drama. I've thought about whether I was too hard on them. I've sat with that question honestly. What I keep coming back to is this. I gave them every opportunity to handle it differently. I came back to the table. I offered a structured solution. I did not call the police that first night even though I had grounds to. I tried to find a path that protected everyone. The path they chose was to laugh about it on the phone and call me a sucker. When actions have real consequences, it's not cruelty. It's just the natural result of choices made freely. Becca made choices. They caught up with her. That civil judgment existed before I ever got involved. The collections firm was already looking for her. All I did was stop being the hiding place. What I want to remember from all of this, what I think is actually worth carrying forward, is that doing the right thing and being a pushover are not the same thing. You can be decent and still hold a line. You can love someone and still say no. You can act with integrity and still protect yourself, and the integrity doesn't disappear just because you used it strategically. I made coffee in my kitchen this morning. The house was quiet. Outside, a kid was riding a bike in slow loops around the cul-de-sac. Normal, ordinary, unremarkable morning. I sat there and I thought about how much I had missed it, and I thought about Carol and I thought about Becca, and I let myself feel it fully, all of it, the grief and the relief together. Then I got up and went to work, because that's what you do when you've built something worth protecting.